AITA for moving out after my mother-in-law moved in temporarily and never left. I was standing in the parking lot of a storage facility at 11:30 on a Saturday night, watching two guys I'd met on Craigslist 3 hours earlier load the last of my furniture into a rented truck when I realized I'd just abandoned my own house. Not sold it, not lost it in a divorce. Abandoned it, like a sinking ship. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent 6 years paying a mortgage on that place, another 2 renovating it, and now I was paying strangers $80 an hour to help me escape it in the dark, like some kind of criminal. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Rachel, calling for the 19th time that evening. I sent it to voicemail and handed the shorter guy an extra 20. He looked at the bill, then at my face, and didn't ask questions. Smart man. 3 months earlier, this would have been unthinkable. I had a good life. Not perfect, but solid. Rachel and I had been married for 8 years, together for 11. We'd bought the house in a decent suburb about 40 minutes outside the city, the kind of neighborhood where people actually waved at each other and knew their mailman's name. I worked in commercial property management. She taught 4th grade. We had a dog named Copper, a vegetable garden that produced exactly 3 tomatoes every summer, and a standing reservation at the Italian place downtown every other Friday. It was the kind of ordinary, comfortable existence that people make fun of until they don't have it anymore. Then, on a Monday in late September, Rachel came home from school and told me her mother needed to move in with us, temporarily, just until she got back on her feet. Maybe 6 weeks, 2 months tops. Diane had been living in Florida for the past 15 years, ever since Rachel's father passed away from a heart attack at 53. She'd remarried a guy named Frank, sold real estate, sent us cheerful Christmas cards with photos of them on various beaches. I'd met her exactly 4 times, our wedding, 2 Thanksgivings, and once when we flew down for a long weekend. She was pleasant enough in that aggressively upbeat way that certain women of a certain generation perfect, lots of comments about how thin Rachel looked, questions about when we'd have children, stories that went on too long about people we'd never met. I didn't love her, didn't hate her. She was just there, safely contained in another state, calling once a week to talk to Rachel about nothing in particular. Then Frank died. Sudden stroke while playing golf. Diane found herself alone in a condo she couldn't afford, with no job prospects at 61, and Rachel insisted we help. Of course I said yes. What kind of husband says no to that? She arrived on a Wednesday evening in October with 4 suitcases, 2 cardboard boxes, and a ceramic lamp shaped like a pelican that she insisted went on our mantel. Rachel had converted my home office into a guest room, which meant my desk, filing cabinets, and work materials migrated to a corner of our bedroom. Fine, I told myself. Temporary. 6 weeks, maybe 8. I could work from the dining table if I needed to. Diane cried when she saw the room Rachel had prepared, hugged us both, and promised she wouldn't be a burden. She made lasagna that first night, asked thoughtful questions about our jobs, complimented the house. I remember thinking maybe this wouldn't be so bad. By the end of week 2, she'd rearranged our kitchen cabinets because it makes more sense to keep the glasses near the sink, started joining us for every meal whether invited or not, and had opinions about everything from how I loaded the dishwasher to what route I took to work. Rachel kept saying, she's just trying to help, and she's going through a lot. I kept my mouth shut and reminded myself it was temporary. The first real argument happened on a Saturday morning in early November. I'd gotten up at 6 to go for a run before the day got away from me, came back sweaty and looking forward to a quiet shower and coffee. Diane was already in the kitchen, had made a full breakfast spread, and seemed offended that I wanted to shower first. "It'll get cold," she said, gesturing at the eggs and bacon and pancakes I hadn't asked for. I explained I'd eat after I cleaned up. She pursed her lips in that way I was learning meant she thought I was being rude, but wouldn't say it directly. "Rachel always eats right away," she said, "before her food gets cold." I took a breath, counted to 5, and said I wasn't Rachel. Then I went to shower. When I came back down 20 minutes later, she'd put all the food away and was sitting at the table with a cup of tea, looking wounded. Rachel gave me a look that clearly communicated I was the asshole. I ate a protein bar and went to the garage to work on a bookshelf I'd been building. That became my pattern. Retreat, avoid, keep the peace. I told myself it was just a few more weeks. By Thanksgiving, Diane had been with us for 7 weeks, with no mention of leaving. She'd stopped looking for apartments, stopped talking about Florida entirely, and had somehow accumulated more belongings despite not having gone shopping. Family photos on the walls, decorative pillows on the couch, a set of china in our dining room cabinet. Our house was slowly becoming her house. I tried to bring this up with Rachel one night after Diane had gone to bed. "Has your mom said anything about her timeline?" Rachel got defensive immediately. "She's grieving, David. Frank just died 3 months ago. She needs support." I pointed out that supporting her didn't mean she lived with us indefinitely. "It's not indefinite," Rachel snapped. "It's just until she's ready." "When would that be?" I asked. She didn't have an answer. The conversation ended with her accusing me of being heartless and me sleeping on the couch because Diane was in my office and I couldn't even retreat to my own workspace anymore. December came. Diane started decorating for Christmas in mid-November, filling our house with her ornaments, her traditions, her preferences. She invited her sister and brother to stay with us for the holidays without asking us first. Rachel found out when she overheard a phone call and confronted me about why I hadn't prepared the guest room. I didn't know, I said. Did you? She hadn't either. When we asked Diane about it, she acted confused, said she'd assumed it was fine. We had the space. Family was important. Her sister and brother arrived with their own opinions about our house, our marriage, our life choices. I spent Christmas in my own home feeling like a guest. The brother, Robert, asked me why I didn't have a better job if I worked in property management. The sister, Carol, kept making comments about how Rachel had lost her spark since moving north and marrying me. Diane nodded along to all of it. I gritted my teeth and survived until they left on the 28th. That night, I told Rachel we needed to set a firm move-out date for her mother. She cried and said I was trying to abandon her mom during the hardest time of her life. I said I was trying to save our marriage. She said if I really loved her, I'd be more patient. January arrived with no change except the temperature and my rapidly deteriorating mental health. I'd started having trouble sleeping, would lie awake at 3 in the morning listening to Diane moving around downstairs, running water, opening cabinets, existing in what used to be my peaceful home. I'd put on 15 pounds from stress eating and drinking more than I should. My work performance was slipping. My boss, a normally understanding guy named Gregory Sutton, pulled me aside after I missed a deadline and asked if everything was okay at home. I gave him some vague answer about family stuff and promised to do better. What was I supposed to say? That my mother-in-law had staged a hostile takeover of my house and my wife couldn't see it? That I was being slowly erased from my own life? It sounded crazy even in my head. I started staying late at the office, not because I had work, but because it was the only place I could exist without Diane's running commentary on my choices. Rachel noticed, accused me of avoiding her. She was right, but not for the reasons she thought. The breaking point came on a Friday in late January. I'd taken the afternoon off to finally address the situation head-on. I'd prepared what I wanted to say, had researched apartments in the area where Diane could afford to live, even offered to cover her first month's rent. I waited until Rachel got home from school. The three of us sat in the living room, our living room that no longer felt like ours, and I laid it out as kindly as I could. Diane had been with us for 4 months. We loved her and wanted to support her, but it was time to discuss next steps. Rachel's face went pale. Diane's expression shifted from confused to hurt to angry in about 5 seconds. "Are you kicking me out?" she asked. "After everything I've done for you?" I said, nobody was kicking anyone out. We just needed a plan. "I cook for you. I clean. I take care of this house while you're both at work. And this is the thanks I get?" Rachel jumped in, defending me at first, saying that's not what I meant. But Diane was on a roll now, tears streaming down her face, talking about how she'd lost her husband, lost her home, and now her own daughter was throwing her away. Rachel crumbled. Within 10 minutes, I went from trying to set reasonable boundaries to being painted as the villain who wanted to make her mother homeless. That night, Rachel told me she needed space to think. She couldn't believe I'd ambushed her mother like that, couldn't believe I'd been so cold. I tried to explain that 4 months wasn't temporary, that we'd never agreed to permanent, that our marriage was suffering. She said if our marriage was suffering, it was because I couldn't be compassionate during a family crisis. I asked when it would stop being a crisis and start being our new normal. She didn't answer. She slept in the guest room with her mother that night. I lay in our bed alone, staring at the ceiling, and realized with perfect clarity that I'd lost. Not the argument, the whole situation. Diane wasn't leaving. Rachel had chosen. And I could either accept being a tenant in my own house or I could leave. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. I started planning my exit that night, lying in the dark, making mental lists of what I'd need to take, where I'd go, how to do this without completely destroying what remained of my marriage. Maybe if I left, the shock would wake Rachel up. Maybe she'd realize how bad things had gotten. Maybe absence would accomplish what words hadn't. It was a desperate hope, but it was all I had. I spent the next 3 weeks quietly preparing. I opened a new bank account Diane couldn't comment on when the statements arrived. I rented a storage unit across town and started moving things out bit by bit. Boxes of books, tools from the garage, clothes I didn't wear often. I did it during work hours, took long lunches, made excuses about meetings. Rachel was so absorbed in managing her mother's emotions that she barely noticed. When she did comment on missing items, I said I'd donated them or they were at the office. She accepted it because she wanted to. The alternative was admitting something was seriously wrong, and she wasn't ready for that. I contacted a lawyer, a stern woman named Laura Brennan who specialized in family law. She listened to my situation with the kind of detached professionalism that probably should have been comforting, but just made me feel pathetic. "You're not being abused," she said bluntly. "You're being disrespected and boundary stomped, but legally, your wife has every right to let her mother live in your jointly owned home." I asked about separation. She asked if I wanted a divorce. I didn't know. I just wanted my life back. Brennan suggested I document everything: dates, conversations, financial impacts, changes to the household. If this ends up in divorce proceedings, you'll want to show a pattern of behavior that made the marriage untenable. I started keeping a journal on my phone, encrypted, password protected. February 3rd. Diane threw away my leftovers to make room for her groceries, then acted confused when I asked about them. February 9th. Rachel and Diane went to dinner without inviting me, came home laughing about inside jokes I wasn't part of. February 15th. Diane asked when I was planning to get serious about my career, because Rachel deserved better. I showed restraint I didn't know I had and simply left the room. The documentation felt simultaneously petty and necessary. I was building a case against my own life. The absurdity wasn't lost on me. I kept thinking about the version of myself from 6 months ago, the guy who had a stable marriage and a home office and didn't need to hide his exit strategy in encrypted files. That guy was gone. I was what remained, paranoid, exhausted, planning my escape like a prisoner of war. The final straw came on a Saturday in late February. I'd been at the storage unit all morning, moving my tools and workshop equipment. When I got home around 2 in the afternoon, I found Diane in my garage, my workshop space, the one area she'd mostly left alone, rearranging everything. She'd decided it was too cluttered and had thrown out half my hardware, labeled the rest with a label maker, and reorganized my tool chest according to her system, which made no sense. Years of carefully organized materials, specific placements I'd developed through trial and error, all undone in a morning. I stood there staring at the carnage, feeling something inside me snap. Not anger exactly, resignation. I walked into the house, went upstairs, and started packing. Everything. Clothes, documents, photographs, anything that was mine. Rachel found me 40 minutes later with 3 suitcases on the bed and asked what I was doing. Leaving, I said. Her face went through several emotions: confusion, disbelief, anger. You can't just leave, she said. I told her I couldn't stay. Not like this. Not anymore. What followed was the most painful conversation of my life. Rachel begged, cried, promised things would change, accused me of giving up, said I was abandoning her just like her father had. That last part was a low blow, and she knew it. I explained as calmly as I could manage that I'd tried everything. I'd been patient, I'd compromised, I'd asked for reasonable boundaries, and nothing had changed. Her mother had taken over our house, our marriage, our lives, and Rachel had let it happen. She said I was being dramatic. I asked her when she'd last chosen me over her mother. She couldn't answer. I asked her when she thought Diane was leaving. She said she didn't know. I asked if she'd ever asked. Silence. That silence told me everything. Diane wasn't leaving. This was permanent. Rachel had decided that months ago, but had never said it out loud because she knew I'd leave. Well, now I was leaving. She grabbed my arm, said we could figure this out, go to counseling, something. I said I'd go to counseling when her mother had her own place. She said that wasn't fair. I said none of this was fair. Diane appeared in the doorway then, drawn by the raised voices. She looked at the suitcases, at Rachel crying, at my set expression, and her face hardened. This is what you're doing? She said to me. Throwing a tantrum because you're not the center of attention anymore? I didn't respond. Engaging with her had never worked before. It wouldn't work now. I zipped up the last suitcase. Diane continued, her voice rising. Rachel has been nothing but good to you, and this is how you repay her? By running away when things get hard? I picked up 2 of the suitcases. Rachel was sobbing now, saying my name over and over. Diane stepped into the room, blocking my path. You're making a mistake. You walk out that door, you're proving you never really loved her. I met her eyes and said the only thing that mattered. I loved her enough to give you 4 months of my life. That's 4 months more than you deserved. Then I walked past her, down the stairs, and out to my car. Rachel followed, still crying, still begging. I loaded the suitcases into the trunk. She asked where I was going. I said I'd figure it out. She asked if I was coming back. I said I didn't know. That was the truth. I genuinely had no idea what came next. I drove to a motel off the highway, one of those anonymous places where the clerk doesn't look up from his phone when you check in. The room smelled like industrial cleaner and had a painting of a lighthouse bolted to the wall. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at nothing for probably an hour. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Rachel, Diane, Rachel's sister Carol, even her brother Robert calling to tell me what a piece of garbage I was. I turned it off eventually. The silence was profound. For the first time in months, I was alone. Actually alone. No background noise of Diane moving around, no tension waiting for the next criticism, no walking on eggshells in my own home. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt hollowed out. That night, I ate gas station food and tried to process what I'd done. I'd left my wife. My marriage might be over. I'd walked away from a house I'd invested years and money into. And for what? Because my mother-in-law was overbearing? It sounded absurd when I phrased it that way. But it wasn't just that. It was the death by 1,000 cuts. Every small boundary violation, every time Rachel chose her mother's comfort over my sanity, every day I felt less like a husband and more like an unwanted roommate. Those cuts had bled me dry. Sunday morning, I drove to the storage unit and met the guys I'd found on Craigslist. They showed up with a truck at 9, asked no questions about why we were moving stuff in the middle of the night, and got to work. We went back to the house while Rachel and Diane were at church. Rachel had started going regularly with her mother, another change I'd noticed but hadn't commented on. We moved fast. Furniture from the garage that was mine, boxes from the attic I'd stored there, my desk and filing cabinets from the corner of our bedroom. The guys were efficient, probably used to weird situations. By the time we finished and I was standing in that storage unit parking lot at 11:30, my old life was in a 10x10 concrete box, and I was officially homeless. I checked into an extended stay hotel that night, the kind with a kitchenette and weekly rates. It was clean, quiet, and mine. I slept better than I had in months, which told me everything I needed to know about the state of my marriage. When I woke up Monday morning, I had 83 text messages and 19 voicemails. I ignored all of them, showered, and went to work like nothing had happened. Gregory Sutton noticed something was different immediately. I must have looked lighter, or maybe just less dead inside. He pulled me aside during lunch and asked point blank if I'd left my wife. I told him I'd left my house. He nodded slowly, said he'd wondered when I'd hit my limit, and offered to let me stay in his rental property that was between tenants. It's furnished, clean, rent's reasonable. Better than burning money on hotels. I asked why he'd help me. He shrugged and said he'd been through a nightmare divorce himself and recognized the look. You're not the villain here, kid. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. I took him up on it. By Wednesday, I was living in a small 2-bedroom townhouse in a decent neighborhood, paying below-market rent to my boss, and starting to feel like a functional human again. I still hadn't talked to Rachel. Every time she called, I let it go to voicemail. Every text went unanswered. I knew I was being cruel, but I also knew that if I engaged too soon, I'd get pulled back in before anything actually changed. I needed space. Real space. Time to think clearly without Diane's commentary or Rachel's tears. 3 weeks into my absence, Rachel showed up at my office. The receptionist called back to warn me, and I briefly considered hiding in the bathroom before deciding that was too pathetic even for my current situation. Rachel looked terrible. Thinner, pale, dark circles under her eyes. We went to the coffee shop across the street and sat in a back corner booth. She started by apologizing, which caught me off guard. She said she hadn't realized how bad things had gotten, that she'd been so focused on helping her mom through grief that she'd neglected our marriage. I asked if Diane had moved out. She said no. I asked if there was a plan for her to move out. Rachel hesitated, then said her mother wasn't ready yet. I stood up to leave. Rachel grabbed my hand, desperate. Please, just listen. I'm working on it. I've been looking at apartments for her. I just need more time. I asked how much time. She didn't know. I asked her to imagine our roles reversed. If my father had moved in, taken over our house, disrespected her for months, and I'd done nothing to stop it, would she have stayed? She started crying again. Through tears, she said she understood why I left, but didn't understand why I wouldn't come back. I told her I'd come back when her mother had her own address. Not a plan, not a timeline, an actual, separate residence. That meeting ended with nothing resolved, but at least one thing clarified. Rachel still didn't see this as urgent. In her mind, I was being stubborn, and her mother was still grieving. The fundamental disconnect remained. Over the next few weeks, she tried various tactics. She'd show up at the townhouse with dinner, suggesting we eat together like old times. I'd accept the food, but not the company. She'd send long emails about memories from our early relationship, trying to remind me why we'd gotten married. I'd read them and feel sad but not swayed. She even tried getting our friends involved, couples we'd known for years who called to say I was being unreasonable, that marriage was about sacrifice, that I should go home and work it out. I stopped answering calls from anyone in our social circle. The isolation was deliberate. I couldn't afford to be talked down from the one boundary I'd managed to set. If I gave in now, before Diane actually left, I'd be signing up for years more of the same. Maybe decades. The rest of my life, potentially. That thought kept me firm even when loneliness threatened to break my resolve. In early April, I started seeing a therapist. Dr. Michael Reynolds, recommended by my insurance company, was a calm, methodical man in his 50s who specialized in family systems therapy. I went in expecting him to tell me I was overreacting, that I should try harder, that this was all fixable if I just communicated better. Instead, he listened to the whole story and said, "Your mother-in-law has enmeshed herself into your marriage, and your wife has allowed it because addressing it would mean confronting her mother's manipulation. You're not the problem here." Hearing that from a professional was like taking the first deep breath after months underwater. He gave me a term for what I'd experienced: emotional abuse by proxy. Diane wasn't hitting me or screaming at me, but she was systematically undermining my place in my own home, while Rachel enabled it by choosing not to see. We talked about boundaries, about the difference between supporting a family member and sacrificing your marriage for them, about what healthy relationships actually looked like. He also said something that stuck with me. You can't make your wife choose you. You can only decide what you're willing to live with. I was willing to live with a lot, apparently, but not this, not anymore. Meanwhile, Rachel's campaign to get me back intensified. She started therapy too, whether genuinely or as a tactic, I wasn't sure, and would text me updates from her sessions like proof she was changing. Therapist says I need to set better boundaries with my mom. working on communication skills. Talked about your needs today. I didn't respond to most of them. When I did, I asked the same question. Has your mother moved out yet? The answer was always some variation of not yet. In May, Rachel tried a different approach. She invited me to a marriage counseling session, said her therapist thought it would be helpful. I agreed, mostly because Dr. Reynolds encouraged me to show good faith efforts. The counselor, a woman named Dr. Patricia Vance, was skilled at creating a safe space for difficult conversations. Within the first session, though, it became clear Rachel still didn't fully grasp the situation. She talked about how hard the past few months had been, for both of us, about how she missed me, about how she was trying to balance everyone's needs. Dr. Vance asked her directly, "What is your plan for your mother's living situation?" Rachel said she was looking at apartments. Dr. Vance asked when she planned to have her mother move. Rachel said she wasn't sure. Dr. Vance looked at me and asked what I needed to consider coming home. I said I needed Diane to not live with us. Not. Rachel started to cry, said that felt like an ultimatum. Dr. Vance said it was a boundary, and boundaries were healthy. Rachel said it wasn't that simple. We had 4 more sessions over the next month. Each one followed the same pattern. Rachel would acknowledge the problem, cry, promise to work on it, but never commit to an actual timeline. I'd restate my boundary. Dr. Vance would try to facilitate compromise. Nothing changed. After the 5th session, Dr. Vance pulled me aside and said something that confirmed what I already knew. Your wife isn't ready to change the situation. She's hoping you'll eventually give up and come home without her having to make her mother leave. The question is, how long are you willing to wait? I asked what she'd do in my position. She said she couldn't answer that, but she could tell me that in 20 years of counseling couples, she'd seen this pattern before. The spouse who won't set boundaries with their parent usually doesn't start until they've lost something significant enough to force change. Sometimes that's the marriage. Sometimes it's worse. I thought about that conversation for days. What was I waiting for? Rachel to wake up? Diane to spontaneously decide to leave? Neither was going to happen on its own. I was in a holding pattern, suspended between a marriage I'd left and a divorce I didn't want. Something had to give. In mid-June, something did. I got a call from Laura Brennan, my attorney, who I'd kept on retainer without really knowing why. She said she had someone in her office who wanted to speak with me, wouldn't say who, but insisted it was important. I drove over that afternoon, confused and slightly worried. The someone turned out to be Diane's brother, Robert, the same guy who'd spent Christmas at my house asking insulting questions about my career. He looked uncomfortable in Brennan's office, perched on the edge of a leather chair like he might bolt at any moment. Brennan introduced us and explained. Robert had contacted her after doing some digging into my situation, said he had information I needed to know. I sat down slowly, trying to figure out what angle this was. Robert cleared his throat and said, "I owe you an apology. I didn't know what Diane was really doing until Carol told me last week." He went on to explain that Diane's financial situation wasn't what we'd been told. She hadn't lost her home because she couldn't afford it after Frank died. She'd sold it deliberately, pocketed a substantial profit, and had been planning to move in with Rachel long before Frank's stroke. She told Carol 6 months before Frank died that she was tired of Florida and wanted to be near Rachel. Frank's death just gave her the excuse. I sat there processing this information, feeling anger and vindication in equal measure. Robert continued. Diane had approximately $230,000 in various accounts, owned her car outright, and had a pension from her years in real estate. She wasn't destitute. She wasn't even struggling. She was comfortable and had chosen to manipulate Rachel's guilt to get what she wanted, a free place to live and constant access to her daughter. Robert handed me a folder containing bank statements, property records, and email exchanges between Diane and Carol that laid it all out. Carol thought you should know, he said. She feels terrible about Christmas. We both do. Diane played us too, made us think you were the problem. I asked why he was showing me this now. He said because watching Rachel destroy her marriage for someone who was lying to her didn't sit right with him. You seemed like a decent guy. You didn't deserve what we said to you. Brennan, who'd been quiet during this exchange, asked if I wanted to pursue any legal action. I said I wanted to show Rachel the truth first. She nodded and made copies of everything. That night, I called Rachel and asked her to meet me at the townhouse. She sounded hopeful, probably thought I was finally ready to come home. When she arrived, I had all the documents spread out on the dining table. She looked at them, confused, then looked at me. I told her to sit down and read everything. It took her about 20 minutes to go through it all, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to horror. When she finished, she looked up at me with tears streaming down her face. She lied to me. It wasn't a question. I nodded. She's been lying this whole time. I confirmed. Rachel put her head in her hands and sobbed in a way I'd never seen before. Deep, broken sounds that came from somewhere fundamental. I wanted to comfort her but didn't move. This was her reckoning, and she needed to feel it fully. When she finally could speak, she asked where I got the information. I told her about Robert, about Carol's guilt, about the whole setup. She looked at me with something like betrayal. Why didn't they tell me? I said they probably told Diane instead, and Diane had managed the narrative. just like she'd managed everything else. Rachel stayed for 3 hours that night. We talked more honestly than we had in months. She admitted she'd known something felt off, but had convinced herself she was being paranoid or selfish. Her mother was grieving. Of course she was difficult. Her mother had lost her husband. Of course she needed support. She'd explained away every red flag, every manipulation, every boundary violation, because the alternative was admitting her mother was using her. "I chose her over you," Rachel said at one point, her voice hollow. "Every single time, I chose her over you, and she was lying to me." I asked what she planned to do now. She said she didn't know. She needed to think. I told her thinking was fine, but I needed to see action. I'd been waiting for 4 months for things to change. I couldn't wait indefinitely. She nodded, took copies of the documents, and left. I watched her car disappear down the street and wondered if this would actually change anything or if she'd find a way to rationalize this too. I'd learned not to hope too hard. Hope made the disappointment sharper. 2 days later, Rachel called and asked me to come to the house. Our house. The house I'd abandoned 4 months earlier. I arrived around 6 in the evening to find Diane's car gone and Rachel sitting on the front steps. She stood when she saw me, looking nervous. "I told her," she said. "I showed her the documents. I asked her to leave." I asked what Diane had said. She denied it at first. Then she got angry, said I was turning against her, that you'd poisoned me against my own mother. Then she tried to make excuses, said she was going to tell me about the money when the time was right, that she stayed because she was worried about me, not herself. Rachel's voice was shaking. I told her I needed her to move out by the end of the month. She said if I forced her out, she'd never forgive me. I said I could live with that. I looked at my wife, really looked at her, and saw something I hadn't seen in months. Strength. Clarity. She'd finally chosen. It might have taken longer than I wanted, but she'd chosen. I asked where Diane was now. Hotel. She left about an hour ago. Took most of her things. Rachel laughed bitterly. She packed pretty fast for someone who was supposedly too fragile to live alone. Over the next 2 weeks, Rachel and I worked on rebuilding. Slowly. Carefully. I didn't move back in immediately. Dr. Reynolds advised against it, said we needed to make sure the foundation was solid first. Rachel started individual therapy with a new therapist who specialized in family enmeshment. She joined a support group for people dealing with manipulative parents. She also did something I didn't expect. She called Diane and laid out new boundaries. Supervised visits only, no unannounced drop-bys, no discussions about our marriage or household decisions. Diane, predictably, didn't handle it well. She tried guilt, anger, playing the victim. When none of that worked, she called Carol and Robert to complain, only to discover they'd already sided with us. Isolated from her support system and facing actual consequences, Diane found an apartment 20 minutes away and moved in by mid-July. Rachel and I went to see it together, partly to make sure it was real, partly to show support for the transition. It was a nice place, well within Diane's budget, close to a grocery store and community center. She could have lived there from the beginning. She'd chosen not to. By August, I moved back home. It felt strange at first, like moving into a familiar place that had been rearranged in my absence. Rachel had changed things. New furniture in the living room, different arrangement in the kitchen, fresh paint in what used to be my office, and was now my office again. She'd erased as much of Diane's presence as possible, trying to reclaim the space we'd lost. We went back to marriage counseling, this time with a focus on rebuilding trust and communication. Dr. Vance noted the progress but warned us it wouldn't be linear. You've both been through trauma. Healing takes time. She was right. Some days were good. We'd laugh over dinner, work in the garden together, remember why we'd fallen in love. Other days were hard. I'd withdraw when Rachel mentioned her mother. She'd get defensive when I questioned her decisions. Old patterns would resurface before we caught ourselves. But we were trying. Actually trying. With honesty and effort. That was more than we'd had in months. Diane, meanwhile, was struggling with her new reality. She called Rachel constantly at first, manufacturing emergencies that required immediate attention. Her sink was leaking. It wasn't. She thought she was having a heart attack. She wasn't. She'd fallen and needed help. She'd tripped over a rug and was fine. Rachel handled each crisis with newfound firmness, offering to call appropriate services but refusing to rush over personally. After a few weeks, the fake emergencies stopped, replaced by guilt trips and emotional manipulation. Rachel held firm. I watched her grow stronger through each interaction, learning to recognize the manipulation and deflect it. It was painful for her. The daughter who'd been programmed to prioritize her mother's needs above all else was rewiring herself, but necessary. Dr. Reynolds told me that what Rachel was doing required incredible courage. She's choosing herself, and by extension you, over the most powerful relationship in her life. That's not easy. I tried to remember that on the hard days, when old resentments bubbled up, and I wanted to remind her of everything I'd endured. We were both healing, just at different paces. In September, exactly 1 year after Diane had moved in, Rachel and I took a trip to the mountains. Just us, no phones except for emergencies, no obligations. We hiked, talked, sat in silence, reconnected with who we were as a couple rather than as crisis managers. On the last night, sitting by a fire outside our cabin, Rachel apologized again. Not the superficial apologies from before, but a real reckoning with what she'd put me through. I let her take over our lives because it was easier than confronting her. I made you the bad guy because you were safe. You wouldn't abandon me like she would. I told her I had abandoned her. I'd left. You left the situation, she corrected. Not me. There's a difference. We talked about what would have happened if Robert hadn't come forward with the financial information. Would Rachel have ever asked her mother to leave? She didn't know. I'd like to think I would have eventually, but honestly, I might have lost you first. That honesty, however painful, felt like progress. We were finally dealing in truth instead of comfortable lies. When we got back, life resumed but different. Better. I had my office back, my space, my sense of autonomy. Rachel had her mother in her life, but at a healthy distance. Diane tried a few more times to wedge herself back into the center of things, showing up unannounced, trying to invite herself to holidays, testing boundaries, but Rachel held firm each time. By Thanksgiving, we had a new tradition, dinner at our house with friends, and a separate lunch with Diane at a restaurant the next day. Supervised, time-limited, in public. It worked. Christmas was similar. Diane complained constantly about being excluded from real family time, but Rachel didn't budge. You had your chance to be part of our family respectfully. You chose manipulation instead. This is the consequence. I was proud of her for saying that. A year earlier, she couldn't have. Now she could, and did, repeatedly. In January, a year and a half after I'd left the house, Rachel came home from therapy and told me she'd made a breakthrough. Her therapist had helped her understand that her mother had been conditioning her since childhood to prioritize Diane's emotional needs above everything else, including Rachel's own well-being. I wasn't just enabling her this past year. I've been doing it my whole life. Dad's death just gave her more ammunition. She talked about memories from childhood, times when Diane had manipulated situations, played victim, demanded attention, patterns Rachel had normalized because they'd always been there. She did this to Dad too, Rachel realized. No wonder he had a heart attack at 53. The stress of managing her emotions probably killed him. It was a dark thought, but one that brought clarity. Rachel wasn't just protecting our marriage now. She was breaking a generational cycle. That awareness changed things fundamentally. She stopped feeling guilty about the boundaries. She stopped waiting for Diane to suddenly become reasonable. She accepted her mother for who she actually was, someone who loved being needed more than she loved the people who needed her. By spring, our marriage felt solid again. Different from before, but solid. We'd been through something most couples don't survive, and we'd come out the other side changed but intact. We still saw Dr. Vance occasionally for tune-ups, but the crisis had passed. I'd forgiven Rachel, truly forgiven her, and she'd forgiven herself, which was harder. We'd learned to communicate without defensiveness, to spot manipulation from outside sources, to prioritize our partnership above all else. Diane remained in our lives peripherally. Birthday calls, occasional lunches, supervised holidays. She never acknowledged the lies, never apologized for the manipulation. That was fine. We didn't need her to. We knew the truth, and that was enough. Her relationship with Rachel would never be what it once was, and Rachel had made peace with that loss. I grieved the mother I wished I had, she told me once. Now I'm dealing with the mother I actually have. That seemed healthy to me. Looking back now, 2 years after that Saturday night when I loaded my furniture into a stranger's truck, I can see the whole arc clearly. Was I the asshole for leaving? By traditional standards, maybe. Husbands are supposed to stick it out, compromise, make it work. But traditional standards assume both partners are operating in good faith, which we weren't. Rachel was so deep in her mother's manipulation that she couldn't see straight, and I was drowning trying to maintain a marriage to someone who kept choosing against me. Leaving wasn't about punishing her. It was about survival, about refusing to accept a reality where I didn't matter in my own life. I don't regret it. I regret that it took something so drastic to wake us both up, but I don't regret drawing the line. Some people probably still think I overreacted, that I should have been more patient, more understanding. Those people didn't live in that house for 4 months. They didn't feel themselves being slowly erased by someone who smiled while doing it. They didn't watch their spouse transform into someone unrecognizable while refusing to see it happening. I did. And I made the only choice I could live with. Rachel and I are good now. Actually good, not pretending. Everything's fine good. We talk openly about what happened, use it as a reference point for why boundaries matter. If either of us starts slipping into old patterns, me withdrawing, her over-accommodating, we call it out immediately. We've earned our second chance through hard work and honesty, and we don't take it for granted. Diane is what she is. We can't change her, only how we respond to her. That response is now firmly grounded in reality rather than obligation. She gets what she gives, nothing more. It's not a warm relationship, but it's honest. And honestly, that's all we can offer her. The rest is up to her, and we're not holding our breath. As for whether I was the asshole, I'll let you decide. I just know I'd make the same choice again if I had to. Because sometimes loving someone means loving yourself enough to leave until they can meet you halfway. I left. Rachel met me. We came back together on new terms. That's our ending. Not perfect, not fairy tale, but real. And after everything we went through, real is all I wanted. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.